Sometimes, you tune in here to try and make sense of the world, and then sometimes the headlines they throw a total curveball.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And this is one of those cases.
Yeah.
A fire in Delhi, but it's not just any fire. This is at the residence of a high court judge, a sitting high court judge.
Right.
And what happened afterwards it sparked some serious questions about, the integrity of India's judicial system.
Yeah.
So we've got a really interesting stack of material to go through today.
Yeah.
Some insights from some YouTube analysis by First Post HW News English and Career 24/7.
Okay.
So let's just dive right in.
Yeah.
Our goal today is to try to get to the bottom of what happened here, the big questions that this raises about the Indian legal system and just all the different perspectives.
I think what's fascinating here is that, an event like a fire, which seems so contained, can actually ignite such a wider discussion and bring to light these sort of pre-existing concerns about a really vital institution. And I think it's a reminder that sometimes, the most significant issues are revealed in the most unexpected ways.
Yeah. Okay, so let's unpack this whole thing.
Okay.
Starting with, the literal spark.
Yeah.
So around March 14th, reports started coming out about a fire at the official residence of Justice Yashwant Varma.
Right.
He's a sitting judge at the Delhi High Court here in the capital.
Okay.
He wasn't home at the time, thankfully.
Okay.
It was his relatives who actually spotted the blaze and called, the fire department.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
So in the process of putting out this firefighters allegedly found something pretty extraordinary.
Oh.
A huge pile of cash, according to First Post.
Wow.
Or an even more specific number, 15 crores. That's 150 million Indian rupees.
Right.
That's according to HW News English and Career 24/7.
Wow.
And this wasn't in the, the main living areas or anything like that.
Right.
This was found in the servants' quarter.
Okay.
Specifically a storeroom.
Interesting.
Just the initial reports themselves, I think, are pretty striking.
Yeah, to find such a large amount of unexplained cash in the vicinity of a high court judge
Right.
immediately kind of prompts all these questions.
Exactly.
And this detail about the location in the servants' quarter definitely kind of adds to the mystery.
It does, and the story takes another turn.
Okay.
So initially, the Delhi fire chief, a guy named Atul Garg, he confirmed finding cash.
Oh.
But then things got a little cloudy.
Oh.
He later retracted that statement,
Oh, really?
claiming that the press trust of India PTI
Right.
had misquoted him.
Oh, wow.
This is a point that both HW News English and First Post highlighted.
Okay.
So you can imagine the immediate confusion, right?
Yeah, was there cash or not?
Exactly. Was there a huge amount of cash or not?
Right.
I mean, it's almost like a detective novel unfolding in real time.
This kind of contradictory information right at the start, I feel like can be so damaging to public trust because when the basic facts are unclear and contested,
Yeah.
it makes it really hard to even have a productive conversation
Right.
about the wider implications.
Yeah.
It really underscores, I think, the importance of reliable and verifiable information,
Yes.
especially when we're dealing with matters of public interest.
Absolutely.
So given this initial confusion, do you think, how much damage do you think this back and forth does to the public's perception of, the judiciary's transparency?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, maybe aiming for clarity. The Supreme Court stepped in.
Okay.
Career 24/7 details how they released video footage
Okay.
via the Delhi police
Okay.
depicting burnt cash at the judge's residence.
Wow.
And this video, which has now been widely circulated, reportedly estimates the burnt cash to be over 15 crores
Wow.
and confirms its location in that servants' quarter.
Okay.
Seeing is believing, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court's decision to release this visual evidence is significant, right? It suggests an effort to be transparent and maybe even get ahead of speculation and misinformation.
Right.
And the scale of the burnt currency visible in that video, it's undeniable, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, amidst all of this, Justice Varma has strongly denied any wrongdoing.
Okay.
He's claiming that this whole situation is a conspiracy to defame him.
Oh, wow.
This is according to Career 24/7.
Okay.
He's essentially saying that he has no idea where this cash came from and that someone might have planted it to damage his reputation.
Justice Varma's denial and this framing of the events as a conspiracy, I mean, they are understandable responses, right, when you're in a situation like this.
Right.
However, as Career 24/7 points out, they don't really address the core question here.
Yeah.
How could a high court judge with a publicly known salary
Right.
legitimately accumulate such a massive amount of cash?
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem plausible through normal means.
It certainly gives you pause.
Yeah.
Now, almost immediately after these revelations, another big development happened. The Chief Justice of India and the collegium.
Right.
Now, when we talk about the collegium, just for those who might not be familiar, it's essentially the Chief Justice of India and a few of the senior-most Supreme Court judges.
Okay.
And they're the ones who make decisions about judicial appointments and transfers.
Got it.
So they decided to transfer Justice Varma from the Delhi High Court to the Allahabad High Court.
Interesting.
And First Post mentions that Justice Varma had actually worked at the Allahabad High Court earlier in his career.
Okay.
Before being appointed to Delhi in 2021.
Okay.
So in a way, it was like a return to his former post.
I see, but the timing of this transfer is critical, coming right after those reports of the cash.
Right.
It just inevitably raises questions about a link.
Of course.
Regardless of the explanation.
Okay.
Even if the transfer was already in process before this.
Right.
The sequence of events just creates a perception that's hard to ignore.
Yeah, and that perception has definitely resonated. Lawyers at the Allahabad High Court have strongly opposed this transfer.
Really?
First Post and HW News English both reported on these protests, with some lawyers even stating that they are not a trash bin for tainted judges.
Wow.
I mean, this really highlights the level of concern within the legal community itself about what this all means.
The reaction from the Allahabad High Court Bar Council is really telling, I think. It demonstrates this concern about maintaining the integrity of the judiciary.
Absolutely.
And a resistance to potentially compromised individuals being moved into their jurisdiction. Their language is so strong, really reflects how seriously they view these allegations.
I mean, this whole episode has unsurprisingly put a spotlight on this broader issue of judicial corruption in India.
Of course.
And all three sources, First Post, HW News English, and Career 24/7, they all touch upon this.
Yeah.
You know, this uncomfortable reality. And it makes you wonder if something like this can allegedly happen with a high court judge in the nation's capital.
Yeah.
What might be happening elsewhere in this system?
I think this incident is a really stark reminder that judicial corruption, while often discussed quietly, it remains a significant challenge.
Yeah.
That perception of impropriety at the higher levels of the judiciary can have such a ripple effect, undermining public confidence in the whole legal system.
Right. And as First Post highlights, senior advocates like Supreme Court Bar Association President Kapil Sibal are calling for reforms, particularly in the collegium system, to bring more transparency to judicial appointments.
Right.
He argues that the current process, where judges basically appoint and promote each other without much outside scrutiny, becomes especially problematic in cases that involve alleged misconduct.
Yeah, it's often described as the fox guarding the henhouse.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
The collegium system has been a subject of ongoing debate.
Right.
And this lack of external oversight can make it very challenging to ensure accountability.
Yeah.
You know, allegations like this surface because internal mechanisms might be perceived as biased or insufficient.
Of course.
And this potential for insular decision-making has been a point of criticism for a long time.
Yeah, so what could happen next for Justice Varma?
That's the big question.
Well, First Post outlines a few possibilities.
Okay.
The collegium could initiate what they call an in-house inquiry.
Okay.
And this would typically be led by a Supreme Court judge and 2 High Court Chief Justices.
Right.
Now, an in-house inquiry is different from a criminal investigation by the police.
Right.
It's an internal mechanism within the judiciary to look into allegations of misconduct.
Got it.
Now, if he's found to have acted improperly, the Chief Justice of India could ask for his resignation.
Okay.
But if he refuses, the only formal way to remove a high court judge is through impeachment by Parliament.
Okay.
And that requires a special majority.
Right.
2/3 vote of those present in voting.
Right. So that's a pretty high hurdle.
It is a very high hurdle.
Yeah.
The process for holding a high court judge accountable is complex and deliberately so.
That's right.
To protect the judiciary's independence from potential political interference.
Right.
However, this complexity can also make it very difficult to address these instances of alleged misconduct swiftly and effectively.
Right.
And the fact that no sitting or former judge in India has ever been impeached or convicted for corruption, this was pointed out by Career 24/7, really underscores the challenges inherent in this whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. But the concerns, I think, extend beyond just financial impropriety.
Right.
First Post and HW News English also point to the quality and the impartiality of judgments
Right.
as being under scrutiny.
Yeah. And some of the examples they cite are, frankly, pretty jarring.
It's true. Public trust in the judiciary, it relies not only on freedom from corruption,
Right.
but also on the wisdom, fairness, and sound judgment demonstrated in its pronouncements.
Exactly. Take, for instance, this example that first post mentions
Totally.
of a judge in the Allahabad High Court who stated that grabbing a woman's breast doesn't amount to rape,
What?
nor does breaking her pajama strings.
Wow.
This stands in such stark contrast to global trends that are actually widening the definition of rape
Right.
to be more inclusive and victim-centric.
Of course.
It really makes you question the understanding of the law
Yeah.
in some instances.
These statements are deeply troubling.
Yeah.
And they highlight this potential for outdated or insensitive interpretations of the law within the judiciary.
Yeah.
And this reflects a concerning disconnect between some judicial interpretations and evolving societal understanding of sexual assault.
Yeah.
And that can potentially undermine the legal protections that are afforded to victims.
And unfortunately, the concerns about judgment quality don't end there.
Right.
HW News English also points to these really troubling instances of potential bias
Okay.
in judicial remarks, including labeling a Muslim-dominated area as Pakistani.
Wow.
And even speaking of things like green terrorism and white terrorism.
These kinds of remarks from the bench just seem so out of place for someone in a position of authority.
Yeah, I mean, these kinds of remarks can really foster a perception of bias and prejudice.
Right.
And that has absolutely no place in the judiciary.
Of course.
Judges are supposed to be impartial arbiters.
Right.
And statements like this can really erode the faith of minority communities and the public as a whole in the fairness and impartiality of the system.
Yeah, and then there's that really uncomfortable example involving the former Chief Justice of India, Justice Gogoi, who, as mentioned in his own book, excerpt cited by HW News English, actually sat on a bench hearing a sexual harassment case against himself.
I mean, the inherent conflict of interest there
It's staggering.
is mind-boggling.
That instance raises really serious questions about the integrity of the judicial process
Absolutely.
and adherence to, these fundamental principles of justice.
Right.
The principle of natural justice clearly states that no one should be a judge in their own cause.
Exactly.
And for a chief justice to preside over a case where they are the accused, even with later acknowledgments that maybe it could have been avoided, it just sets such a troubling precedent.
It does, and the perceived inconsistencies in how justice is applied are also just glaringly apparent.
Yeah.
HW News English draws a sharp contrast between the swift bail granted to convicted rapists like Asaram Bapu, who received interim bail in a 2013 rape case, and then further interim bail from the Supreme Court until March 2025 in another rape case.
Wow.
Both reportedly on medical grounds.
Okay.
And then Ram Rahim, who seems to get frequent paroles, often coinciding with election periods.
Right.
With the absolutely heartbreaking denial of a simple straw and sipper to the ailing 83-year-old Stan Swamy.
Oh, my God.
Who suffered from Parkinson's.
That's just awful.
I mean, the contrast is just so jarring.
It's disturbing.
And frankly, deeply concerning.
Yeah, I mean, these stark differences really highlight the potential for biases, whether conscious or unconscious, to influence judicial decisions. And it raises questions about equal access to justice for all.
Adding another layer to this, Career 24/7, mentions a 2024 statement by a former Chief Justice of Meghalaya High Court, Sane Banerjee, who claims that he was transferred after reporting corrupt judges with evidence to the Chief Justice of India.
Wow, if this is accurate.
Right.
It suggests this potentially chilling effect on those who want to expose wrongdoing within the system.
Exactly. And let's not forget the significant 2015 statement from retired Supreme Court Judge Markandeya Kachu, cited by Career 24/7, who claimed that a staggering 50% of the higher judiciary in India is corrupt.
Wow.
Now, that's a broad and serious accusation.
It is.
But it reflects a level of concern that's clearly been present for quite some time.
Justice Kachu's statement is certainly controversial.
Right.
And difficult to definitively verify.
Of course.
But it reflects a significant and widespread perception of corruption within the higher judiciary.
Yeah.
Whether that specific number of 50% is accurate is debatable. But the fact that such a serious allegation comes from a retired Supreme Court judge with his experience cannot be simply dismissed.
Yeah. And finally, HW News English reminds us that there is an ongoing CBI FIR
Okay.
That's a first information report.
Right.
Essentially a formal complaint leading to a police investigation.
Okay.
Against Shimoli Sugar Mills, its directors, and others, including Justice Yashwant Varma himself.
Okay.
When he was a non-executive director.
Right.
This relates to alleged fraudulent loan schemes with Oriental Bank of Commerce.
So it seems this isn't the first instance where questions have been raised regarding Justice Varma's conduct.
It's not. So in the midst of all of this, what has the Supreme Court been doing?
Right.
Well, Career 24/7 highlights their decision to release the video evidence of the burnt cash to the public, presenting it as a step towards transparency and a way to maintain public trust in the judiciary. They also issued a directive to Justice Varma to preserve his phone data, messages and calls from the past 6 months.
I mean, the Supreme Court's actions releasing the video evidence and directing the preservation of phone data, they suggest a recognition of the seriousness of the situation and a willingness to take some steps in the direction of investigation and transparency. But as Career 24/7 ultimately poses, the fundamental question remains, should judges in India be subject to greater accountability?
Exactly. So let's try to connect all the dots. We've seen a fire at the discovery of a massive amount of cash, a swift transfer that's raised eyebrows, serious allegations of corruption at various levels within the judiciary, and deeply troubling examples of questionable judgments and inconsistencies in how the law is applied.
Yeah, it's this complex web of events that really challenge one's faith in the system. You know, if we connect this to the bigger picture, these events have profound implications for the fairness and justice that 1.4 billion Indians depend on. As First Post emphasizes, you know, the integrity of the judiciary is a fundamental pillar of any democratic society.
Of course.
And when that foundation is perceived as unstable, it can erode public trust. And undermine the very rule of law.
It really can. And as HW News English asks, what happens if the very foundations of our society are not?
It's a profound question.
It is a profound question, and it gives you a lot to think about.
Absolutely.
So given everything that we've talked about today, you know, what fundamental reforms do you think are most urgently needed to ensure the integrity and quality of the Indian judiciary? And perhaps even more importantly, what role does public scrutiny play in achieving that accountability? And ensuring that those scales of justice are balanced for everyone?
Those are the key questions.
They are.
That we need to keep in mind.
They really are.